Titus Interactive. Like I said, French Titus Interactive of France seized Interplay in a hostile takeover through majority stock acquisition, and then they gutted the company for its games and a few of its employees. I joined Titus a week after Interplay laid off everyone in the company, including me, as it declared it was shutting down for good. I was hired to oversee development and technology across North America, which really represented the United States and Canada, and I think I mentioned earlier, weirdly, and South Korea, because their publishing market was the United States and Titus had no one else to manage it. As a US technical director, I traveled to prospective and contracted game developers to hear their game pitches with producer and friend Doug Brandon. I would assess their development plans in detail: engineering, architecture, interface design, task fidelity and estimation, and dependency analysis process, forecasts versus actuals, etc. Any gap in the developer's capabilities had to be compensated for, designed around, or outright terminated, as in cancel their contract or don't sign one. Of course, canceling a contract reflected poorly on me as much as on a developer, so my mission was always to deliver great games on budget and on time. My reputation for delivering successful games on schedule within budget was very well established, and I continued that tradition with Titus, despite their terrible and outright evil business practices that I would discover working with them over time. I was like martial arts expert Chuck Norris as a Texas Ranger, but for ensuring video game developers had a plan and tracked to it like a fire marshal prevents fires, or bail them out from a failed project like a firefighter hero. My role was both proactive and reactive depending on the developer. In all cases, I had to be prepared and able to figure out what was going on, get involved, and kick butt. The game RoboCop was an Unreal Engine first-person shooter game like every other Castle Wolfenstein shooter clone. RoboCop should have been called RoboCopy. RoboCop was an embarrassment to me as an engineer and developer. It used the license Unreal as an engine, along with much of its reference sample art. The animation, art, sound effects, and music were serviceable, but not polished. RoboCop was a job that I made sure shipped, but I was not happy about its lack of design innovation and its first-pass, unpolished art and audio. I even had to negotiate with Nintendo to front Titus the money to manufacture their first run of their games so that Titus would have the cash flow to pay for subsequent manufacturing runs. The game did not sell enough to merit more manufacturing runs, however, and so Nintendo was left holding the bag with Titus dragging its feet to pay the debt that I had to beg on their behalf for Nintendo to basically credit them for. Titus signed a contract to develop a new fighter genre game called Barbarian with a splinter developer from Sculpture Software called Sapphire, which would further splinter into yet another group called Sensory Sweep, which it would go bankrupt due to fraud and embezzlement charges from its founder Dave Rushton. Sapphire had a decent development team, but they lacked experienced engineering or design oversight on their product teams, and they had no writer or staff or anyone on contract. Unable to find a competent author to write the extensive script in the game Barbarian, Titus turned to me, and so I wrote it all. My background writing adventure modules and role-playing games placed me at the top of candidates to write the over 10 hours of spoken dialogue in the game. Of course, they also needed better tech for compression, which I helped as well. but I had a full-time job as U.S. Technical Director. It was not like my other responsibilities went away just because I was involved helping Barbarian. Fortunately, since all developers I oversaw were contracted with external third-party developers, I had windows of time during the week that was spare or available, an unheard of thing in the game industry in general. The gaps in my primary responsibilities were not enough, though, to finish the script. I decided to commit to working crazy hours like I had done most of my career, especially when I was a contractor myself. I liked the game and I wanted it to be good. I worked most nights until midnight or 2 a.m. and then got to work my usual 9 a.m. It was not that much sleep, but it was enough. I found my creativity waned though around 9 p.m., and so I boosted it with a glass of wine. Then another glass, and sometimes there was a bottle that I found empty. I would head to bed around that time. This pattern of late night work and drinking was unfortunately not uncommon for me throughout my career. Interestingly, I both observed and had been told often that drinking is part of game development. Just like not getting enough sleep or having short or no vacations is part of game development. The harms of that much drinking and that limited sleep and that reduced vacations and reduced rest seemed to be evident over the years and decades. It brought harms to people I saw and eventually to me. Were I not drinking all those decades, I sincerely believe that I would have failed and been unable to cope with so many challenges, and especially during the harder times in my hell difficulty life. Once more, why do I describe my life as hell difficulty? The answer is simple. My life has been fraught with extremely challenging, traumatic events that I believe would crush most any ordinary person. Only my extraordinary resilience and methods of insulation and isolation, coupled with my pull-up, positive, higher morale resistor, enabled me to endure and overcome the many, many hardships. But even the strongest of people with willpower of iron and steel-trap minds need help to separate from the fight to rest and recuperate, so they can rise again to raise holy hell down upon their foes and triumph over projects and achieve goals otherwise unsurmountable and unachievable. The strongest people can get help. Help comes in many forms: friends, family, faith and religion, alcohol and drugs. There are all forms. But I specifically and emphatically exclude hope from the list of things that people get help from to overcome hardships. Why? Because hope is not a strategy. I have told people for as long as I can remember. The dictionary defines hope: to want something to happen or be true. The definition of hope is awfully broad and vague. It is so imprecise that it cannot be quantified or even attached to any action or other thing or word or even an idea. Hope exists entirely unto itself as its own idea and its own thing. My goal in defaming hope is not to minimize or discard it. I am a strong believer in the incredible importance of hope. But I cannot emphasize enough that hope is not an actionable thing. It is a non-action thing. There is nothing that anyone can do about hope. It is just something inside people that makes them keep going forward despite things being overwhelming or otherwise preventing them from success. And so, when people tell me to believe them because they hope things will work out, I recoil and I condemn the willingness to march into hell without a plan. The team and product will fail, and it could all be avoided with due diligence and proper planning up front. Therefore, hope can actually be bad. Hope can kill a project or a team or both. Hope is something that you bring with you from home, and you take it back home with you at the end of the day. Hope is something that you keep to yourself. Hope can be an inner light that shines brightly for you, but it is not going to help you actually do or solve anything. At best, hope gives another day to find a solution, but hope itself is not a strategy. Hope is not a strategy. So let's get back to Titus. Although it was not Titus's formal motto to do evil unto others, it was evident that its founding brothers, Hervé and Eric Kahn, were very much content for evil to fall on anyone but themselves. Let me share a perfect example. They signed a contract with a developer where Titus was to pay half the development costs, and the developer would likewise pay the other half. With the contract from Titus signed, the developer was able to secure a business loan to cover their half of the costs. The developer would receive twice the normal royalty to offset their increased skin in the game risk. Titus was unsure if the developer could make high-quality games, and so positioned the split cost model as a compromise, where they both took risk. But Titus's goal, their real reason, was nefarious. The Kahn brothers knew Titus may not have enough money to cover their half of the development costs beyond the first few months due to their corporate cash flow. They did not have enough money to manufacture and publish the game, and so they would rely on credit from Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony, gambling that the game's quality was enough to inspire them to front the cash so they could manufacture it and bring it to market. And Titus had soured, though, their relationships with Nintendo over their unpaid RoboCop manufacturing deal, further reducing their odds for any success. In other words, the Kahn brothers knew that Titus could not honor the contract they signed, and they knew that if things did not work out for the developer, they would default on their loan and they would lose everything, not just the contract. But the Kahn brothers did not care about the potential devastation and impacts on others. They gambled with people's livelihoods and happiness, their very trust in humanity. They used people. They gambled that Titus would find more money to cover their half of development and get credit to manufacture so they could bring a game to market. They were all Kahns, not just the Kahn brothers. So Titus's requirements were basically three things. 1. Make a high-quality, fun game. 2. Find cash to cover development costs. 3. Convince manufacturers to front the cash to manufacture games so they could sell them. It was a long shot, and one that was not shared with the developer. It was secret. In fact, it wasn't even shared with me or the producer, Doug Brandon. We all operated under the lie that Titus was solvent and in good faith was intending to complete and publish the game. After all, that is what publishers did. The game in question was Ricochet Rick. By the time we discovered what Titus had done, it was too late. The developer had spent a lot of money and was all in. Titus was not all in, and they bailed during development as the developer ran out of money. Worse, Titus was telling Doug and I that Ricochet Rick milestone quality was just unacceptable and it needed fixing. And why did they say this? Because Titus also was running out of money. The developer and Titus were running out of money. Titus did this repeatedly until it became apparent there was nothing that the developer could ever do to get approved. Titus was exploiting the contract to push the developer to keep funding the game, while Titus shopped it around looking for investors or alternate publishing avenues. Titus set that developer up to fail, with only a long shot for success. And things failed. The developer went bankrupt, and they harbored resentment towards Doug and I, though we had nothing to do with the scam that Titus pulled over them and us. Titus did the same thing with a South Korean developer, but Doug and I shared what Titus had done to Ricochet Rick with the Santa Monica-based developer, and the South Korean developer found a way to sever their relationship and arrangements to minimize the damage by continuing with Titus. So let me end again with Titus did evil unto others. With the collapse of the Titus contracts and Titus running out of money, the writing was on the walls. Doug and I concluded that it was only a matter of time until Titus would cut their US offices entirely. They no longer had any North American development going on. They had no money to sign new contracts, and their developer scam reputation was out there. And they had no new games at all at retail or manufacture to make more money. Not long later, one day, I received an email that informed me that it was my last day of employment at Titus, and that I should leave my badge and exit the building. There was no formal letter of employment termination, not even a phone call. No one in person at all. It was surreal. Not even security or human resources. Nothing. Nobody. I was laid off entirely electronically from my manager that worked in Paris, France. I may not have mentioned that. My boss lived and worked in France. I saw him about 2 times a year and spoke on the phone once a month. Most everything was done through email. In some ways, being fired, albeit laid off, my email was consistent with how we communicated. That said, it was still weird. There was another curious thing about being laid off and told to just leave your badge and go home. Where is my last paycheck? What about my unused vacation and sick time? Personal time off? What about my medical insurance continuation options? Cobra, whatever. Is anybody offering references or recommendations on a place I might interview? No, nothing. Doug and I were kicked to the curb by an email. And we were not paid our last paycheck. We were not reimbursed for our outstanding travel or business expenses. Doug and I were promised bonuses that were also unpaid. We were ripped off by our employer. My childhood employer ripoff at Clure & Associates happened again, just to me as an adult. I work for someone in good faith, and they're supposed to pay me upon completion of that work. But in these instances, I was not paid for the work that I completed, as promised. Clearly and obviously, employers cannot be trusted. Doug embraced his fate, saying, "We saw it coming. We had a good ride. Nothing lasts forever. We'll land on our feet." Doug had the ability to believe that things would work out, even when things seemed dire. I was not happy, and I was not willing to accept my fate. It could not stand. I researched my options, and I went to the California State Labor Board and met with a clerk who directed me to the labor officer. The middle-aged man with combed but mildly scruffy hair and a beard wore a worn brown sports coat, slightly yellowed white collared dress shirt, blue jeans with wear marks, and Western cowboy boots. Hanging on a coat rack in his office was a big cowboy hat and a black trench coat. He was a big man, and he was a character, right out of a TV show. The labor officer leaned back in his chair. "What can I do for you? And what's your name?" Well, I shared my personal information as he wrote it down on a notepad. I detailed that Titus had emailed me that I was laid off, but refused to pay me my last paycheck or reimburse incurred expenses. He told me the case was simple. If Titus had enough money, they must pay me. If they did not have enough money, they still must pay me, but I would be in line with everybody else who demanded to get paid. And I would still need to wait for a bankruptcy proceeding and liquidations of their assets to get paid. And since Titus was international, they would likely just vanish with any assets that they desired to keep. He explained I would be out of the money, likely never get repaid. But the officer explained he can set a date for me to meet with them, and he can subpoena them, and we can see where it goes. And so we did. When the day came to meet, Titus sent a French director that was currently in the United States to represent them. The Titus business director asserted that neither Doug nor I deserved our last paychecks because we were not as effective as was expected as employees. But the labor officer cut him off abruptly, and he said, "Whoa, the law states you will remit payment upon services rendered according to agreement. It is that simple. Richard was at work, right? You agreed to pay him a fixed compensation as a salary based on a presumed hourly rate, right?" The director paused. The Weasley Titus director weakly answered, "Well, I guess, yeah." The officer proclaimed, "Titus owes Richard Seaborn for his time worked. That amounts to 2 weeks of pay. The state mandates you provide 2 weeks' notice to an employee, and so you owe an additional 2 weeks of pay. Richard had unused vacation time, which Titus must also pay for at the rate of his salary. You have 2 weeks to provide either Richard with a cashier's check in the full amount of unpaid salary, 2 weeks' pay, and vacation cashed out in a full amount. Or you can provide that same amount to this labor office, and we will remit it to Richard. Are we clear, Mr. Director?" The officer's tone was condescending, authoritative, and damning. Well, the Titus director asserted, "Titus cannot afford to pay Richard. We have no money." The officer looked at the director and replied, "You have no assets like a delivery truck. You have no bank accounts at all. You have no untapped credit lines that you plan to use on something else. If you have any of these things, or anything of cash value that can be sold or liquidated, and you do not disclose them right now in good faith to compensate Richard, you and your executives, including your Hervé and Eric Kahn, which I have record of, will be banned from entering the United States of America, and you will have warrants for fraud issued against you for arrest. Now, am I clear?" The labor officer was loud, firm, and outright condemning with a glare that would crush the strongest of people. He was obviously very well practiced in dominating deadbeat employers. He whipped out a leather wallet and opened it up to a big silver badge on one side and a government seal with lots of text on the other. And he declared, "I am a sworn deputy of the United States of America and of the state of California. I recognize you are unwilling to comply with the laws of this country and state. I am hereby placing you under arrest." He opened his drawer and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. He stepped up and walked around the desk and asked the director to step up and turn around so he will be cuffed. He began reciting the Miranda rights. "You have the right to..." Freaked out and in disbelief, the director exclaimed, "Okay, we can find the money. We can find the money. We'll get Richard paid 2 weeks." He called Eric Kahn on his cell phone right there and he ranted in French, which I presumed were obscenities laced with my name here and there. 2 weeks later, I was paid, and thus ended Titus and its tales of sorrow and woe. I was not paid my bonus. I was not reimbursed my expenses, but I did get my salary and my 2 weeks severance. It was all very apparent. Being an employee is no guarantee of employment. You have little power over the job or your life situation. Your employers hold all the power, making you always at the mercy of their decisions and whims. Employers can pull the rug out from under you at any time. They can decline or cancel your vacations. They can end your job. They can fire you just for not being a fit, never mind your talent and contributions. They can refuse to give promised, expected raises and bonuses. And though small, they can take away promised perks. But as an employee, you might get some stock grants. You may even get a company that will match your 401k investments for retirement contributions. To a maximum amount, of course. You would likely be granted formal vacation and sick time, though conversely, you have a specified maximum number of days to be sick, or rest and vacation. Employers control both the amount of time and when you can use it. So it's generally a controlled perk by the employer. And importantly, as an employee, you do effectively get a next contract automatically at the end of your current project. Getting automatic work renewal, in my opinion, truly is the only real value of being an employee. The rest can be crafted as a contractor or consultant into your working and personal lifestyle.